Welcome to the Eat This Book podcast. I'm Michael Whitworth. Each day we take a small piece of scripture and we sit with it. Not a quick snack that disappears before lunch, not a chore you check off of a list, but rather a meal meant to be savored. So pull up a chair. Let's eat. Here in episode 23, we're talking about Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 through 24. We've been building toward this passage for a while now. The corruption, the violence, the grief of God, the warning, the ark, the door shutting, and now finally, the flood. And the text doesn't flinch. It doesn't soften what happens. It just tells us, all flesh died. Listen to how the passage describes it. Verse 21, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Verse 22, everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Verse 23, he blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. 3 times, in 3 consecutive verses, the same truth. Everything died. The text wants us to feel the weight of it, the totality, the finality. This is uncreation. Remember Genesis 1? God separated the waters above from the waters below. He gathered the seas and let dry land appear. He filled the sky with birds and the earth with creatures and breathed life into human nostrils. Now it all reverses. Verse 11, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The waters that God separated are reuniting. The boundaries that held creation together are dissolving. The deep that was bounded is now unleashed. The sky that was stretched out is now pouring down. This isn't just a bad storm. This is creation coming undone. And the word that echoes through the passage is prevailed. Verse 18, the waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth. Verse 19, and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. Verse 20, the waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. Verse 24, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. 4 times the waters prevailed. The Hebrew word is gabar, to be strong, to be mighty, to overcome, to conquer. The water is winning. The flood is victorious over everything in its path. Nothing can resist it. The highest mountains are covered. The strongest creatures are drowned. The mightiest men, the Nephilim, the men of renown from chapter 6, they're gone. Everything humanity built, everything humanity achieved, everything humanity was proud of, swallowed by water. The waters prevailed, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. I think we need to sit with this before we move to comfort. We live in a world that doesn't like to talk about judgment. We prefer a God who only blesses, only forgives, only accepts. We've edited out the parts of the Bible that make us uncomfortable. We've turned God into a therapist who affirms and never condemns. But Genesis 7 won't let us do that. This is the same God who called creation very good, the same God who breathed life into Adam's nostrils, the same God who grieved over human wickedness, and this is the same God who opened the fountains of the deep and blotted out every living thing. God judges, sometimes catastrophically. Genesis 7 makes that unavoidable. And the judgment is thorough. Not some, not most, all. All flesh died that moved on the earth. All. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Everything. He blotted out every living thing. Every. God doesn't do half measures. When he judges completely. The waters don't miss a corner. The flood doesn't spare a valley. It prevails everywhere, over everything, for 150 days. I imagine what it was like inside the ark. You can hear the rain, For 40 days and 40 nights, it doesn't stop. The ark rocks and pitches. The animals are restless. It's dark. It smells. And somewhere out there, everywhere out there, the world you knew is disappearing. Did Noah hear anything else? Did voices carry across the water? Did he wonder about neighbors, relatives, people he'd warned? We don't know. The text is silent on Noah's experience. It just tells us what happened outside. All flesh died. And then this haunting phrase in verse 23, only Noah was left and those who were with him in the ark. Only Noah. Out of a whole world of people, 8 survived. Out of all the cities Cain's line built, all the culture they created, all the lives they lived, only 8 people were left. The remnant is small. Salvation is narrow. The door was open for anyone, but only 8 went through. 150 days. That's how long the waters prevailed. 5 months of floating, 5 months of not knowing when it would end, 5 months with no land in sight, no anchor, no certainty, except that God had shut the door and they were still breathing. This wasn't a quick deliverance. This was endurance. This was faith stretched out over nearly half a year of waiting, trusting, surviving. Sometimes God's rescue takes longer than we expect. Sometimes the flood doesn't recede on our schedule. Sometimes you float for 150 days, and all you can do is trust that the God who shut you in will eventually bring you out. Here's what this passage forces us to confront. God's judgment is real. It's not a metaphor. It's not an empty threat. The same God who loves you is the God who drowned a world. That should produce reverence. That should produce holy fear. That should make us take sin seriously. But here's the other side. God's salvation is also real. In the midst of total destruction, waters prevailing, all flesh dying, creation coming undone, one boat floats. One family survives. One remnant remains. The judgment is overwhelming, but it's not the whole story. Because verse 23 doesn't end with all flesh died. It ends with only Noah was left. Only, but left. The flood shows us what God thinks of sin. He doesn't tolerate it. He doesn't negotiate with it. When wickedness fills the earth, God acts. The waters prevail. But the ark shows us what God provides for those who trust him. Even in the midst of judgment, there's a way through. Even when all flesh dies, 8 people live. Even when the waters prevail over everything, they can't prevail over grace. This passage is terrifying. It should be. But it's also clarifying. It tells us the truth about the world we live in. Judgment is coming. It came once in water. It will come again in fire. The world is not permanent. Our rebellion is not sustainable. There is a flood coming, and there is an ark. The question is, are you in it? So here's what Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 through 24 offer up to us today for us to savor. If you've been ignoring God's warnings, if you've assumed judgment is a bluff, that God would never really follow through, this passage says, think again. The fountains of the deep burst forth. The waters prevailed. All flesh died. God is patient, but God is just. If you're in the ark, if you've trusted God and entered through the door he provided, this passage says you will survive what's coming. The waters prevailed over everything except the ark. Judgment fell on everything except those God had shut in. You're safe, not because the flood isn't real, but because your boat is. And if you're in the 150 days, floating, waiting, wondering when deliverance will come, this passage says, hold on. The waters prevailed for a season, but they didn't prevail forever. The next chapter begins with 3 words that change everything. But God remembered. The flood is real. The judgment is real. The death is real. But so is the ark, and so is the God who put you in it. The fountains burst, the windows opened, the waters rose. All the high mountains covered, all flesh dead, all the world unmade, and the waters prevailed for 150 days. But somewhere on the surface of that vast, terrible sea, one boat floated. Only Noah was left. Only, but left. Next time on Eat This Book, we come to the turning point of the flood story. 3 quiet words that change everything. But God remembered. After 150 days of silence and water, God moves again. The wind begins to blow, the waters slowly recede, and the ark finally comes to rest. But the waiting isn't over yet. If you've ever wondered whether God has forgotten you in the middle of the flood, this episode will be for you. Join me next time as we sit with Genesis 8 and learn what divine remembrance really means. Thanks for eating with me. Until next time, may the Word dwell in you richly.